Listen.
Welcome to Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal. Joining me today are the happy pair. Welcome to Real Deal. Welcome to Real Deal. I am Brian Rose, and we are live here at London Real World headquarters to talk about something very serious, which is Lockdown 2.0 in Britain. This is a nightmare without end, and today I want to talk about the long-term ramifications to our economy, and I want to talk about this concept of control versus elimination. This is such an important conversation we're having here today, so please share this out to your socials because we really have to have this conversation, or really we are in a bad situation, and I think our survival is at stake. And I'm not talking about our survival from the virus. I'm talking about our survival from the lockdown. So I want to talk about this today. Again, sending out all of my love and support to everyone in the United Kingdom that is suffering this Tier 4 lockdown. Our gyms are closed. Our hospitality venues are closed. Our restaurants, our cafes, our museums, any place where we can actually congregate is now closed. And a lot of people are finding out this is a stressful situation. A lot of people's businesses are being ruined. Our younger generation, they're calling Generation COVID, is very depressed about their future. They don't think they're going to have the jobs that they need. And I want to talk about all of this today, and I want to back it up with data that shows you that we should not be locked down right now. And I want to go into this deeper. So before we get started, I appreciate you following us live on so many different platforms. I need to hear from you, and I'll be checking in with you 3 times during this broadcast and literally reading out your comments. So please leave me your comments right now. First, I have a few questions. Tell me, do you think the full lockdown in Britain now is a right or wrong thing to do, and why? Will your business or your employment survive this lockdown, and how? Are you worried about the future, and why? Do you think we can control the virus or eliminate it? And finally, do you think we need better leadership in this country? Please leave me your comments now. It's really, really important. I think that we need to get London back to work. I think we need to make sure that our leaders stop cherry picking the data and the science they want in order to implement the policies that they desire. I think that's a real problem. We need to talk about control versus elimination of the virus. We need to talk about a science-based approach. And we need to talk about this concept of living with the virus. And this is a conversation that no one is having out there. We need to find a way to live with this virus, to coexist with it. And I'm going to be talking about that today on this broadcast. And finally, we need to look about the cost versus the benefits. We need to think about our quality of life, and I'll be going into that deeper as well. So please leave me your comments now. And I just want to say a couple things before we get started. As some of you know, 3.5 weeks ago, I announced my plans to become your next mayor of London. And at the time, a lot of people weren't sure about why we were doing this. Some people questioned our seriousness. They thought this might be a publicity stunt. But let me just say, we were always very serious about this, and we always planned to win this race. And we plan on becoming your next mayor of London. And on May 7th, we will move into City Hall here in London, and we will start changing the game. We will start making the decisions that everyone can see we need to make, and yet our leaders refuse to make. We're going to start making intelligent decisions, science-based decisions. We're going to make a proportionate response to the virus. And honestly, the feedback from all of you has been incredible. It's been more than we ever expected. We honestly believed it would take months before everyone out there started to realize that, yes, we were the candidate to put forward, because what we were talking about just made sense. It made sense, and no one else is talking about getting us back to work. We have a 2-party system here in this country like we do in many places in the world, including America. And that 2-party system has run this city of London and this country of the United Kingdom into the ground. And it's this current crop of politicians with their vested interests and their one main goal, which is to get themselves reelected. That's all they seem to worry about. And meanwhile, the 9 million citizens of this city are quite literally dying, not only from COVID, but from the economic damage that is being done to us right now. It's brutal, and the long-term ramifications are extensive. This is going to take years and years, maybe decades, to recover from the damage being done right now because of the lockdown, not because of the virus. And I want to talk more about that, but I just want to say your support has been so incredible that we moved in the odds makers down rapidly into yesterday. We have now become in second place in this race. And again, these bookmakers are where people put their money where their mouth is, all right? These aren't just speculations. These aren't articles written by political bloggers, okay? This is where you can place money right now in order to get an outcome. And again, I don't condone gambling by any means, but I will just say the betting agencies usually get elections right. And as of yesterday, we have now moved into second place ahead of the conservative candidate, which has been a party in this country for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a massive party. It's the party of our current prime minister, and we are now ahead of that candidate. Nothing like this has ever happened in the history of the mayoral race for London. An independent candidate like ourselves has never been in second place, and I just want to say that's all because of you. And we thank you so much for your support. Every single comment you're putting on these videos, I'm reading. Every single share, every single like, every single donation that we have on the brianformayor.london website is crucial. And every time you tell someone about our race to run, it's pushing us forward. So I just want to thank you so much for the incredible support. We are blown away. And honestly, we already had a lot of energy. We were always deeply convicted in our values and our thoughts, but you've just given me a supercharge. So thank you so much. And trust me, every one of your comments and shares and likes and donations does not go unnoticed. It gives me even more fuel to push forward. We are literally 6 months away, almost exactly, from the election here, which is going to be on May 6th of 2021. And with your support, we are going to move into City Hall as a collective. I feel like we're all going to move in together, not just the 9 million citizens in London, but I feel like everyone around the world that is behind us in our agenda. We are going to move in and show the world what a major city can do when run correctly. And I honestly think with your support, we can show the New York Cities of the world, the Los Angeleses of the world, the Tokyos and Sao Paulos and Madrids and Barcelonas and Romes of the world and Berlins of the world, how you can run a major city properly, how you can get it back to work, how you can put people's health first, science first, make a proportionate response to the virus, and also use science-based decision making. So again, Paddy Power, one of the biggest bookmakers in the world, has now put us in second place. And it's pretty incredible. We are second behind the incumbent. And I promise you that before Christmas, we are going to be in first place. And that's our plans, to be in first place ahead of the current incumbent mayor. So we're super excited. And I just want to say thank you so much for all the support and for pushing us into #1 in the betting agencies. And we really appreciate that. So thank you so much. Let's jump into the topics of today. They're very, very important. And I want to get into them right now. The first thing I want to talk about is Lockdown 2.0. The Tier 4 lockdown that this entire country is going through right now. Nearly 70 million citizens are locked down. We cannot go about our business. Only non-essential services are allowed, and we are literally seeing our businesses decimated, our mental health decimated, our younger generation's future decimated. And I want to go into the science behind that decision. So you'll see up here on the screen, and if you're on Instagram, come watch us on one of our other platforms, a graph that was presented to us last Saturday by the Prime Minister and 2 of his members of the SAGE Committee, Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, as the reason, as the justification why we would need these draconian lockdown measures. And funny enough, on the live broadcast, which I watched, of course, which was 2 hours late, we couldn't see these graphs, funny enough. They just weren't enabled for the live broadcast. So I had to dig in and find these numbers later, as did the rest of the Tory party, which brought this stuff up in the parliament this week, and we'll get to that. They showed these big graphs, and you'll see this really huge spike, the purple one there, that says we can expect more than 4,000 deaths per day coming into right around December, all right? And this was a study that was published by Cambridge University and Public Health England, and they predicted this 4,000 deaths per day, which is much higher than the 1,241 deaths that happened in April 21st of this year, which was the highest death count. That was back in the early lockdown 1.0 stages when we knew nothing about the disease. We were terrified, and we probably, for good reason, locked down to be safe, okay? Now they're predicting numbers 4 times that as much in these models. And we've all seen what models have done before. The Imperial College models back in March predicted 10x the deaths that we've seen here. Remember, 500,000 deaths was predicted, and it scared and frightened the entire population of this country. We're still feeling the damage today. So this is another study. And the problem is this study is flawed. And let me give you 2 reasons why it's flawed. First of all, those deaths predicted per day are based on an entirely different criteria that has been used as the norm and standard by Public Health England. And let me explain. A COVID-19 death is someone who died that had tested positive for COVID in the past 28 days. And again, I still think this metric is flawed, because if you get hit by a car or you get shot or you commit suicide after being tested for COVID-19 within 28 days, it's considered a COVID-19 death, even though clearly those reasons I just suggested are probably not due to COVID. So it's already quite a broad generalization of those terms, but at least it was a standard that we could use to compare numbers. This study used a 60-day window. If you had tested positive within 60 days. So already the data was flawed and it should have had big red flags. But of course, we didn't have time to digest that by the time the announcement came. But it goes further. And this is something that our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, brought up in Parliament this week. When she brought it up in front of our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he walked out of Parliament during her rebuttal. I don't know if there's much precedent for that, but he did. And she said this, and this is a very important part. That same model from Cambridge University and Public Health England predicted over 1,000 deaths per day at the last week of October. And by Theresa's own calculations, we had been nowhere near those numbers. And I want to quote our former Prime Minister, Theresa May. And this is what she said in Parliament this week. And I'm going to play a video of her doing this, so you're going to see this very shortly. She said, and I quote, "For many people, it looks as if the figures are chosen to support the policy rather than the policy being based on the figures." Okay, she's saying this about members of her own party, by the way. All right, this is not just an opposition rebuttal. This is someone from her own party. She went further and said, quote, "If you look at the trajectory of the graph that went to 4,000 deaths per day, we would have reached 1,000 deaths per day by the end of October." And she goes on and says, "The average in the last week of October was 259 deaths per day by my calculations." So as Theresa concluded, the prediction was wrong before it was even used. And again, Theresa went on to say, every death is a tragedy, and we want to try to minimize these deaths. And I totally agree with her. But when the model is predicting 4 times the number of deaths in the current time, how can you predict it how can you trust it for predicting the future? It's so clear. And she said this to Boris, and he literally walked out of the Parliament. So you've got someone within their own party questioning the data. And the crazy part is that we found out further this week that even the own UK statistics agency here in Britain has gone on to question the government's use of those same statistics. So it's not just a few Tory members of Parliament. It's actually the agency that checks the use of the data. And so this is the problem. We've gone into full lockdown. We've done it based on an imperfect study that has shown us in real time that it's imperfect, not only the fact that the COVID window was too long. So we are currently locked down with no evidence to support that lockdown. And I want to play for you this clip of Theresa May articulating what I've just talked about. It's 2 minutes. Here she is in Parliament. As she's saying this, our Prime Minister is walking out, and this is the reason we are currently locked down. Here's Theresa.
But there are other examples of where figures have been used in a way that I think has been unhelpful to Parliament and to the public. Let me take the 4,000 figure. It appears that the decision to go towards this lockdown was partly, mainly, to some extent, based on the prediction of 4,000 deaths a day. Yet if you look at the trajectory shown in that graph that went to 4,000 deaths a day, we would have reached 1,000 deaths a day by the end of October. Now, the average in the last week of October was 259 by my calculation. Each of those deaths is a sadness, and our thoughts are with the families. But it is not 1,000 deaths a day. So the prediction was wrong before it was even used. And this leads to a problem for the government, because for many people, it looks as if the figures are chosen to support the policy rather than the policy being based on the figures. So we need these proper analyses. I say that to my right honourable friend. We need to know the details behind these models. We need to be able to assess the validity of those models. But there's one set of data that has not been available throughout, and that is a lack of data about the costs of the decisions that are being taken. Costs for non-COVID treatment in NHS, non-COVID deaths, domestic abuse, mental health, possibly more suicides, and of course cost to the economy. Jobs lost, livelihoods shattered, businesses failing, whole sectors damaged. What sort of airline industry are we going to have coming out of this? What sort of hospitality sector? How many small independent shops will be left? The government must have made this analysis, they must have made this assessment. Let us see it and make our own judgments.
So there it is, our former Prime Minister here in Britain saying that the reason we're locked down is based on flawed data. We should not be locked down right now, and yet this was pushed through and passed through, and now this entire country is suffering. And I'm going to go into the economic ramifications of what's happening right now. I'd love to hear from you. Some great comments coming in. I'm going to go to them right now, but if you're coming late, tell me, do you think full lockdown in Britain is right or wrong? Will your business or employment survive this lockdown? Are you worried about your future, and why? Do you think we can control the virus or eliminate it? And finally, do we need better leadership? Put your comments in here. There's some amazing ones coming in here. I really appreciate all these. Chelsea Fitness Club on IG says, Brian for Mayor, thank you so much. Hardick on IG says the same, Brian for Mayor, I appreciate that. Elle McPherson, former supermodel joining us in Florida. Appreciate you, Elle, says, love the pregame prep. Elle, you've been really supportive of our entire campaign, and we appreciate you. Valerie on IG says, you're the voice for so many people that don't have one. Brian for the win. Thank you so much. Again, so much love here. Angeli Rosine on IG says, sending much love, Brian. I really appreciate this. Another comment on IG says, our survival as a human species is at stake. And I want to get into this. It's really important. Susie Harris on Instagram says, lockdown is wrong because it does nothing for actual immunity. It's an interesting point, and I want to talk about it soon. Rosie on IG says, London needs you for their mayor. Brian Rose, believe me, I appreciate that. Paul La Rochelle says, can you come to Canada to become our prime minister? Trudeau is a joke. I might need to be a Canadian citizen, but I appreciate the request. But honestly, we got work to do here in London first. Welcome to on YouTube says, these lockdowns are majorly unjustified. And I appreciate the point you're making here, and that's the same point we're making it. And yet, the entire parliament had a chance to vote this down, and they voted for it. So it goes to show you that these career politicians and this two-party system, they act in lockstep with one another. They present you as a choice, Labor or Conservative, but you don't actually have a choice. You have their agenda. And that's why we need new blood in this race. That's why we need a new perspective. We need an outsider to come in here and start making real changes. And I appreciate the comments you're making there. Also, Adam on Instagram said, closing the economy is like demolishing a whole town to prevent a house fire. Great analogy. The vulnerable will be more likely to die as a result. I appreciate that. And a few more, they're really coming in here. Nicole on Instagram says, lockdown 2 is pointless. If children are still at school, what pandemic lets kids go to school? It's a good question. They are our future. What is the government actually up to? And it's a great question, Nicole. I appreciate you asking it. It doesn't make sense what the government's doing anymore. They seem to be making decisions that aren't based in science, that are not proportional to the virus, that don't even seem to have any base in common sense. They sure don't serve the citizens of our city or of our country. They do not serve our businesses. They do not serve our economy or our health or our children. So why are they making them? And I've grown tired of trying to find out why, and now I just want to make the right decisions. And that's why we decided to run for mayor. And that's why we talk about this tirelessly every single day, because we want the change. I don't really care anymore why they're making bad decisions. I just want to make the right decisions. And that's my priority going forward. Lastly, Ronson on IG says, no, it's not right. The government have contradicted themselves, and to save face, they are scaremongering by projecting insane death rate figures. It's not fair, and above all, no mental health support. Excellent point, Ronson. I really appreciate you. Again, it's scaremongering. It's using fear. That's the reason we comply with these lockdowns, because they've put so much fear in us, but it's not justified, and it's not the way forward. So I appreciate that. Let me move forward to my second point. And I was really honored yesterday to have an incredible guest on the show. And this guest, his name is Professor David Miles. He is a professor at Imperial College, London. He's a former member of Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. All right, now look, I spent 20 years in finance. Monetary policy is how governments choose short-term interest rates, and it basically controls the economy. It's one of the most powerful positions in government. Some would argue in America, it's the decision the Fed makes. It's more powerful than what the president can decide. So this man is high ranking. He's also former chief economist for Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch, all right? Former member of the Financial Services Authority, which polices all the bankers here. And I sat down with Professor David Miles yesterday and we had a discussion. And the professor said this, quote, the 3-month lockdown earlier this year came at an extremely high price relative to the health benefits. And he went on to say that in another extremely costly lockdown, he believes that the benefits may not exceed the costs. We went on further and we concluded that we cannot survive past 30 days. And he briefly said this, and I'm going to play a video of him shortly. If this lockdown lasts for any longer than 30 days, and honestly, I think he was being generous at 30 days. I think he really wanted to say more like 2 weeks. He said, literally, we won't survive. And he's not talking about surviving the disease. He's talking about surviving as a people. We will no longer have the money to even pay for basic services. We will no longer have the funds to keep this country going. We won't be even to pay for our health services. This is how dire these decisions are being made. And that's why I want to go in deeper on this. But he also made a really interesting point. And he talked about something called QALY. And this is something that's not being talked about, and we need to talk about it right now. It's called the Quality Adjusted Life Year, QALY. And this is the measure that the NHS actually uses to evaluate whether a procedure needs to take place on a patient in the National Health Service. And this is how it works. They look at a patient and they look at a procedure. If the procedure can increase the patient's lifespan by 1 year, then they agree to do that procedure only if it costs £30,000 or less. Let me repeat that. Say there's a cancer surgery that they're about to do or a cancer treatment. If it costs more than £30,000 and it doesn't extend their life by more than 1 year, they say, no, we're not going to do the procedure. Now you might say, well, that's really callous. They should do anything to save their life. But what if that procedure costs £3 million or £300 million or £3 billion? At some point, it's not cost effective to have that procedure for everyone. And the professor went on to say, Brian, our health budget would be 98% of GDP if we spent every dollar to save every life. So at some point, we have to make a decision. And these decisions are made every day in our lives. The speed limit is at, I think, 70 miles per hour in Britain, because that's the optimal limit to make sure transportation moves and we minimize the loss of life. If we wanted to eliminate the loss of life, we would make the speed limit 5 miles an hour, so we would all go so slow there would be no traffic accidents. So every day we make decisions that are somewhere in between optimizing for loss of life and the economic benefits. And he went deeper on this quality adjusted life here. And he said that if you save someone from COVID, they're usually in their 80s. He said on a maximum scale, they have 10 years of expected life left. It's probably more like 5. He said if you multiply that times 30,000, when you save a life, it's if you want to quantify it, it's £300,000 to save that life. And Professor Miles went in and said if you look at that £300,000 figure and you multiply it by the potential 1,000 people that are going to die per day according to some of these models, or even 2,000 or 3,000, when you compare that to the £1.8 billion of loss to the economy every single day, you start to really see a clear cost-benefit analysis. And you start to really understand that eliminating the virus, if you try to do that, we will not survive, because we cannot afford to look at it that way. Again, we need to think about control versus elimination, and we need to find a way to live with this virus. There is no way to eliminate it. But right now, our government has sold you an agenda that this is the way to eliminate this virus, and we are literally crushing our economy, our future, our livelihoods on the back of trying to save a small portion of lives that, when you quantify it, does not justify the loss from this lockdown. I can't put it any clearly. And again, every loss of life needs to be minimized. But this is a disproportionate response to the virus, and it couldn't be made any clearer than by this QALY score. And here's a short video of me talking to Professor Miles about this concept. And again, he's very clear on the cost-benefit analysis, and this is the conversation no one's having. We need to talk about it because it's a real reason why we shouldn't be locked down right now. Here is Professor Miles. if I was maybe just to generalize some of the assumptions you made about that model, I think you said if you save a life, roughly 10 years of life you might save for that person, times the 30,000, I guess that's 300,000 pounds you would potentially save with each life. Is that a rough idea?
Yes, in a way, that's right. So, I mean, if you looked at the average age of people who, tragically have died with COVID, it's somewhere in the sort of low 80s. If you asked what was the life expectancy of people of that typical age, at best, probably it was about 10 years, probably actually a little bit less, given that most of the people who died of that age with COVID had related health problems. So if you then said, well, okay, suppose you apply that National Health Service rule, how many resources using the NHS rule would you want to apply to saving, on average, those kind of lives? And the answer would be, as you say, 300,000 or 400,000 pounds. Now, I stress again, this looks like a very macabre thing to do. It looks like the kind of thing a kind of heartless economist would do, attaching money values to lives saved. But the reality is that that's how decisions are made in public health systems in pretty much every country in the world, and in other areas where governments have to make rules. How fast can people drive on our roads, for example? So it was simply applying that kind of rule. And I think had that analysis said, well, it was a close run thing, whether the lockdown for 3 months was sensible or not, I think I'd be much more open-minded about it. But I think as it turned out, the numbers suggested that the costs were so much higher than the £30,000 per QALY rule would have justified, that it seemed to me you'd have to go way beyond that National Health Service rule to have justified restrictions, blanket restrictions kept in place for as long as we did back in the spring and into the summer here in the UK.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think the maximum deaths was back in April. I think it was 1,200 or 1,242 in one day. So if you took that number of 300,000, which is probably being generous with 10 years of life, and you do the math compared to the GDP loss per day, which I heard now is about 1.8 billion in GDP loss per day on lockdown. Maybe I'm off, but it looks to be orders of magnitude cost benefit analysis. And I know this is kind of a macabre topic, but like you said, we make these decisions every day in our policy, and like you said, the speed limits, the NHS. So it's something we have to face at some point, like you said, in an extended lockdown, and say, this actually just doesn't make sense. And if we continue this, we'll quite literally just bankrupt the nation.
Well, I think continuing to have blanket lockdowns, switched on for a few months, then maybe off for a month or so, then switch them back on, is so costly that my guess is that would not pass any sensible cost-benefit analysis. Again, to stress, that's not the current government strategy. We're told that this is going to be a 4-week lockdown. Hopefully it will succeed in bringing the infection rates down very rapidly, take off the table much of the risk of hospitals being overwhelmed. And that might well be a sensible strategy. I think what wouldn't be, though, is if we kept getting back into this situation, 2 months on, 1 month off, 2 months on, 1 month off. I think that would be pretty disastrous.
And there was Professor David Miles, and I appreciate the fact that, as he would say, this is a macabre topic. I mean, we're talking about mortality, we're trying to quantify it, but it's important that we have these discussions, because we are shutting down an entire country for the potential loss of life of a very few number of people. And again, we haven't even gone into the fact that there would be loss of life anyways from all the economy running. And so it's important that we try to quantify this. We try to really look at the bigger picture, and then we make a decision going forward that is proportionate, that is based on science, and it's based in the long-term interests of our children, of this country, and of the economy and our health services. So that's the most important point here. I want to hear from you now. Do you think full lockdown in Britain is right or wrong, and why? How will your business survive, or will your employment survive through this, and how? Are you worried about your future, and why? Do you think we can control the virus or eliminate it? And do we need better leadership? There's some incredible comments coming in, and I really appreciate them. Keep them coming. We've got Catherine Whitcomb on Instagram saying the lockdown is wrong, detrimental to life. Businesses won't survive. Lockdown is destroying the nation. I couldn't agree with you more, Catherine. The crazy thing is that every single person I talk to feels the same way. People in the streets, taxi drivers I talk to, everybody says the same thing, and yet our leaders are saying something opposite and implementing something opposite. It's frustrating. Susan Liddy on Instagram says lockdown is destroying lives. Chelsea on Instagram says we need a real healthcare system instead of this corrupt disease care system. It's a very powerful point there. We need prevention, not cure. And that's why Health First is very important for my policies going forward. On IG, it says the current mayor of London is the worst ever, does not represent Londoners, does not share our values. I probably agree with you there. Mog Robertson says, definitely Brian for mayor. I appreciate that. Other people supporting us for mayor, and we appreciate you very much like that. Naomi Malone says, we need more people like you, Brian. I really appreciate you very, very much so. Core Value Living says, Brian, I think you would be an awesome mayor. I keep saying I wish you would run for mayor of New York City. Is it possible mayor of both cities? Honestly, right now, I want to focus on London, right? We got work to do here. But hopefully, our policies in London will resonate with mayors all around the world, and they'll see the way we open up our economy, the way we can do so in a safe way, putting health first, put science first, put education first, put our family first, and we can be a beacon of light to cities around the world. So I think we can do two birds with one stone as we move forward. That's why we've received so much international support, and that's why we really appreciate this. This race isn't just for Londoners. This is for not just people in Britain. This race is for everyone in the world, and we appreciate you saying that. So thank you very much. Channel on IG says, we need more people like Brian Rose. Thank you very much. I appreciate. Fulvia says, please continue your work. We need you. Thank you so much. YouTube comment says, mental health is greatly affected by gym closures. I couldn't agree with you more. Again, COVID transmissions, 1.7% of those cases, according to Public Health England's own data, happens in gyms. And yet they've shut those down as non-essential services. And our good friend Nick Whitcomb up in Liverpool, who's been fighting with armed police coming to his gym, fighting back to keep gyms open. He was able to do it through Tier 3. He's had to close down in Tier 4. These measures are so draconian, they are affecting what I believe is an essential service. And so I'm training outside. I'm finding solutions. But, not everybody is going to go the extra mile to train. And what we need is our gyms open. So don't get me started about that. It's totally true. And then we've got Rihanna on Instagram says the lockdowns are harming and killing more people than the so-called virus, from suicides, addictions, mental health problems, and domestic violence. So true. We didn't even quantify that with the Quality Index. We're just quantifying the lives lost. What about all the other issues that are taxing our economy? It's not being spoke of. And again, there's no economist on the SAGE Committee of Scientific Advisors for our Prime Minister. Why? An economist could quantify this. All we have is epidemiologists and scientists with models of what the virus does, but what about all the other ramifications? That's a real problem. And finally, we've got someone else on Instagram that says mental health, especially for our children, seems not to be important to politicians in Europe at all, and I couldn't agree with you more. Let me move to my third and final point here, and this is a crucial one because it really culminates everything that I'm talking about today, and that is this final concept, which is this. Britain is set to suffer the second deepest recession in Europe. The second deepest recession in Europe of all the countries in Europe. This is long-term economic damage. And right now we are expecting a 10.3% GDP loss in 2020. That's opposed to a 2% gain, which is what we expected this year roughly. That's a 12% drop in GDP. And you can see the graph here on the screen that I'm showing. You can see this year, 2020, in comparison with the massive recession that we saw in 2008 and 2009. This was something we hadn't seen in decades and decades and decades. And yet, when you look at what's happening this year, 2008 pales in comparison to the damage we're doing to our economy here. I cannot emphasize how much damage is being done. And Lord Stuart Rose, the chairman or former chairman of Marks & Spencer, one of the biggest retail companies here in Britain, recently came out and said this: for every day we're in lockdown, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to recover. Let me repeat that. For every day in lockdown, 2 to 3 weeks to recover. So one day, 20 days of recovery. If you're going to lock us down for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, how much damage is being done to the economy? We're talking about years and years of damage being done to the economy. And if you look over to Germany, what's happening there? A place where they kept their factories open, their GDP has only dropped by 5.6%. Think about that. Almost half of the drop in GDP is happening in Germany because they kept their factories open, something we did not decide to do here in Britain. And it goes further. Unemployment here in Britain in the fourth quarter could almost hit 13%. Those are nightmare proportions. We're expecting numbers next year of 7 and 8% unemployment in this country. And currently, 25% of our workforce is furloughed, which means they're getting checks from the government. So we don't even know how much unemployment we really have because this is being artificially propped up by the government. And when those checks stop coming, and they will stop coming, we are going to find out how bad we are right now. And it's going to be numbers that are not pretty. Why do I say all this? Because we are experiencing, or we will experience, massive long-term damage that we can't even see right now. Right now, we're living in a fairyland. Everyone's getting a check, 80% of their salary. We're not reporting those unemployment numbers. But when we really find out what's going on, we're going to find out we're going to be paying for this for decades. But it goes further. Our Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, recently announced 150 billion pounds of stimulus, but it's been called, quote unquote, wasteful by a senior economist, saying that it's up to 6.2 billion pounds a month. It's not targeted. It's not given to our hospitality industries, our arts industry, our tourism, and our culture industries whose businesses cannot survive the lockdown. Instead, it's blanketly being given to lots of companies that actually can function during a lockdown. So it's a big mistake. And one other thing I have to say is that this latest furlough announcement, if you noticed, our Chancellor extended it to March. Now, let me ask you a simple question and pay attention to this question. If the lockdown is only going to last until December 3rd or 4th, why are they extending furlough until March? Think about that. They're doing it because this lockdown is going to continue. And you've already heard one of the most senior economists in the country say, if we go past 30 days, we will not survive. And funny enough, our paymaster general here and one of the members of parliament from Portsmouth North, Penny Mordaunt, said, quote, recently she let this slip out, quote, once lockdown is lifted, cases will rise. It means that a high proportion of the population will remain vulnerable to infection, which is why we expect a third or more waves of the virus to be managed by repeat lockdowns. Again, we see duplicitous responses. The Prime Minister said this is only for a month. That's all it's going to last. And yet already members of the government are signaling overtly or covertly that this is going to last longer. And a senior economist is telling us this will literally crush this country. So I want to finish with another video of David Miles talking about how this uncertainty is going to crush our business sector and how any more than 30 days we literally can't survive. So here's Professor David Miles with one final video clip. Is this second lockdown going to cause what they're calling a double dip recession? What do you think the GDP will drop to in the Q4? And even if, say, for example, we're only locked down this time for 60 days, what will be the economic ramifications? As in, how long will it take us to recover, in your mind?
Yeah. It seems quite plausible now as we go into November that GDP will almost certainly, I think, have fallen back a bit in November, possibly a bit in December relative to where we were in the previous months. Therefore, GDP will be a bit lower. So it completely knocks on the head any prospect of this V-shaped recovery that we kind of bounce back by the end of this year. I think it will likely mean that GDP for the whole of this year in the UK 2020 might be, I mean, at least 10% lower than it was in 2019. And maybe that's more like 11, 12% or so, which would be a huge hit, of course. At the beginning of this year, probably most economists were predicting, well, in 2020, GDP might grow by 1.5%, 2%. If it actually goes down by 11 or 12%, then it's kind of 14% or so below where you might have expected. That is an absolutely enormous hit to the economy. I think one of the big unknowns here, and it's interesting that you asked, what might happen if we had a 60-day lockdown, or if it ran up right to Christmas. What we don't know right now is how many firms are actually hovering right on the brink of, we're so underwater now that we're just never going to reopen. And my worry, I think many of us worry about this, I'm sure you do as well, is that there may be a lot of companies who maybe they could live with 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but if it becomes 2 months and they can't open this side of Christmas, they may just feel we can't carry on. I mean, we're just stopping, and they don't reopen then when restrictions are lifted. And the hit to employment becomes not just a temporary thing, but the jobs have gone, and we take years to get them back. I mean, that's a real worry.
Incredible thoughts again from Professor Miles. If you want to watch that full conversation with him, you can go find it on our YouTube channel or on Facebook. But again, just to repeat, he said, if this lockdown goes on any more than 30 days, we literally can't survive. And that's not surviving the virus, that's surviving the lockdown. And this is this cost benefit that we have to analyze right now. Again, this is such an important point to make, and we have to quantify it. Otherwise, there's no way we can move forward. And yet I'm concerned because our government is signaling to us this is going to last 60, 90, 120 days. This will be irreparable damage. And as the professor just said in that last video, there are so many businesses right now that are hanging on by their fingernails. And every day we stay locked down means that some of these businesses will never return, which means long-term job losses, long-term capital expenditure gone from this country, long-term economic damage. We can't compete as a country globally, and we're going to be paying for this for years, decades, or generations. Leave me your comments now. I want to go to them. This is the last chance we got here. Tell me, do you think the full lockdown in Britain was right or wrong, and why? Will your business survive this lockdown? Will your employment survive this lockdown? Do we need better leadership? Do you think we can control the virus or eliminate it? And are you worried about your future, and why? Some great comments in here. I want to read them off now. I appreciate that. Some great support for the mayor campaign. And again, we really appreciate this. The whole team gets excited, and it makes us want to do even more, create more change, create more awareness, and just create more content that challenges the narrative for our government. So every one of these comments, likes, shares, donations really helps. So thank you very much. Richard Edwards says, you will win, no problem. We've got Energy, Love, and Light saying, passion you have is amazing, Brian. Thank you. Dave on YouTube says, who wouldn't want a mayor like Brian? He knows his stuff, and I believe he can change not only our country, but the whole world. Keep it up. Thank you so much. Instafrost on IG says, powerful information, Brian. I appreciate that. And again, when we decided to run for mayor, we decided that we would use data. We would use science in order to prove our points. That was very intentional about us. So every single video you see me make, comment I make, it's backed up in data and science. It's not just my opinion. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just emotion. Don't get me wrong, it's all of that too, but it's always backed by science and data. I'm a scientist by nature, and no one can argue with the numbers, and that's how we can get effective policy and effective change in this country. So thank you for noticing that. I appreciate that. Ben Rogers says, Brian Rose and the truth. Thank you so much. We're trying to give you the truth. That's what we've been doing here at London Real for 9 years. Let's be honest, in 2020, we were persecuted and vilified and censored and banned for giving you the truth. I almost lost my business this year for giving you the truth. My character was assassinated in the mainstream press for giving you the truth. And that's what we're going to do here, no matter what. Seriously, no matter what, we are going to keep giving you the truth. And I think people really appreciate that, and we appreciate you as well. We've got a few others. Lindsay on Instagram says, the government are destroying everything we have worked hard for. I agree. Full of Hope says, yes, Brian, speaking about the real issue, the global financial collapse, we've got to watch out for that for sure. Susanna Lima says, the gym is part of my life. Save small businesses. I agree. Dondre on YouTube says, gyms must stay open. Obesity is allowed, so health and wellness should also be. I agree. Gyms can stay open. We'll protect our health. You can have both, and I want to talk about that. Susan on IG says, I used to love going to farm markets, coffee shops, and food shopping for hours. Now I order online because of strict social distancing and mask rules. It is affecting my life. And this weekend, the entire country of Britain is going to find out how much this affects their life. And they are not going to be impressed. They are not going to be happy, and we're going to hear their voices, and I appreciate you. Sarah Lynn says, we need to stop with the fear-mongering. Cesar Diaz says, Brian for Prime Minister. Look, let's sort out London first, all right? Molly says, thanks for all you do. I appreciate you. And finally, Dave Cleve says, lockdown was a joke. And Brian for mayor, I appreciate your sentiments there. And look, I want to talk about where we are as a conclusion, because it's really important to take all this and to take some action with it. Otherwise, we're just complaining. And again, I don't believe in bringing problems. I believe in bringing solutions. And that's why, as your next mayor, which is happening in exactly 6 months' time, I will get London back to work, period. That is my one main aim. If we can get London back to work, we can show the world, we can show the country of Great Britain what a city looks like when it's functioning, right? When it's making science-based decisions, a proportionate response to the virus, and we will start repairing our badly damaged economy. We will start giving hope to our younger generation. We will start building our health. Again, this is a conversation about control versus elimination. The government, the mainstream media have sold you a fairy tale that we can eliminate this virus. And therefore you are giving away your freedoms, your civil liberties, your own livelihoods, your mental health based on this fairy tale narrative of elimination. The truth is, we can only control this virus. We have to find a way to live with it, and we can. Like we found a way to live with almost every other virus in the past thousands of years. We can find a way. We protect the vulnerable, but we also find a way to make a proportionate response to the virus. So let me say this, and this is a very important point. Not only can we protect our vulnerable, but we can also build our economy. It's not one or the other. In fact, we can do both, and we must do both. This is important. The government seems to tell you it's one or the other. We can protect our citizens, or we can have our economy. You can't have both. I disagree. You can have both. In fact, you must have both, because without an economy, how can we pay for anything in this country? Education, health services, roads, food, anything. We cannot. We must have both. So we need a solution that provides both, and we have that solution. It's about getting London back to work. And it's simple how we're going to do that, getting London back to work. First of all, I, as your next mayor of London, am going to encourage all office workers, especially those in the financial capital, the city where I used to work, to get their employees that are able back in the office. I'm confident we can get 20, 30, 40% of those workforce back in their offices. I'm talking about sitting down and having conversations with 30 of the global financial institutions, law firms that are big employers in the city, and finding out how can we get these employees back in the office, and that will kickstart our economy right now in this city, and for the country it will. Next, I want to allow outdoor seating and the use of streets in our cities until December or March of 2021. It's going to kickstart our retail and our hospitality sectors so they can have COVID-friendly places where people can sit. It's going to give businesses a boost, but right now they are fighting tooth and nail with councils that are not letting them do that. Next, I'm going to remove the congestion charge entirely until mid-2021. There is no point in taxing people when you're barely getting them to spend. This is ridiculous. So the congestion charge holiday happens as soon as I am in place. Next, we're removing business rates. Business rates get a holiday. How can you expect a business to barely make ends meet when you are taxing them? Right now, we need to do anything we can to help our businesses survive. Next, I will stimulate key sectors like the hospitality industry, our arts and culture, and our tourism industry. They need specific help, not some blanket furlough policy that our current chancellor gives to all industries. That's a waste of money. It's frivolous, and I will not do that. Next, we're going to implement science-based protocols, which are being done to an incredible extent in our hospitality venues. These places have created one-way systems, hand sanitizers. These places keep your food safe. They keep everything clean in these establishments. They know how to do it, and they can implement it with great science. We're going to open up our theaters, our museums, our concerts. I've had incredible conversations in this studio with people from this sector that specialize in all of these issues. From our London buses to our arts and our theaters, we can find solutions. And finally, we've got to get our children back to school and keep them at school. We still have low occupancy rates because teachers are in fear of COVID. They can still not get tests, and students are still being held back from school. I will get them back to school, which will get London back to work. These are real solutions that will work. What's not going to work is this, is when our current mayor crusades for a lockdown, when he takes boroughs of this city into lockdown when they didn't even qualify for a lockdown. What's not going to work is when our current crop of politicians seem to have their own agenda that's not based in science. That's not going to work. And that's why, as your next mayor of London, my number one priority is to get London back to work. Because when we do that, everything else will fall in line. And when we don't do that, everything else breaks down. And that's what we're seeing happening right now in London, in all cities here in the UK, in the country, and throughout the whole world. We're seeing a disproportionate response to the virus. We're seeing a total lack of leadership, and we're seeing a complete lack of science-based decision-making. As your next mayor of London, I promise to change all of that. And the thing is, it can be changed like that. We can literally see solutions within weeks, I promise you, and you're gonna watch us do it, and the whole world is gonna watch us. And London as a city, they're gonna watch us become world-class once again. We are currently one of the lowest performing major cities in the world. That is a joke. And it really saddens me. We could lead the world when it comes to an economic comeback and show the other cities of the world how we can do it here in London and in Britain. So I just want to finish by saying I'm optimistic, but unless we have these hard conversations and talk about real ideas with real science, none of this is going to change. And unless we all step up and show leadership in our families, in our communities, with our coworkers, we're not going to solve this. This is going to take leadership from all forms, and it means you're going to have these conversations with people. You're going to have to share these ideas, share these messages, and we're going to have to hold our leadership to task, or we're going to have to replace them. And that's why I've decided to run and become your next mayor of London. And I'll just be honest, I never necessarily wanted this future, but I can't sit idly by and watch the city I love be run into the ground. I just can't do this. And if it comes to 10, 20, 30 years from now, when I look back and realize, Brian, you could have made a difference in 2021, but instead you kept broadcasting and you kept running London Real, which helps millions of people around the world. But honestly, as mayor, we could help hundreds of millions of people by setting an example of what a great city looks like. So I promise to work tirelessly. We are currently in second place, but let me say one final thing. This fight is only beginning. And they are going to throw everything at us. The mainstream media is going to come at us. Government's going to come at us. The two-party system, which we are basically making crumble right now, are going to throw everything at us. They're going to come and assassinate my character. They're going to try to come after London Real. They're going to come after our policies, after our broadcast. But you know the truth. You know what we're saying is the right thing. You know this is the right way forward. And you've known us for the past 9 years. You've known everything that we've done. So I'm going to need all of your help to help defend us, to help tell everyone that no, these ideas are right and we've got to move forward. So with your help, we're all going to do this. I honestly feel like we're all going to move into City Hall together. 9 million Londoners, we're going to make room for everybody, and we're going to find a way to really move forward this science-based agenda, a proportionate response to the virus, and new leadership in this city. So I just want to say thank you so much. I appreciate you. Every comment, every like, every forwarding of a video, every share means so much to me. Every donation makes a difference. So again, please support us. It's brianformayor.london to learn more about my policies, to donate and to volunteer as well. We've got swag, t-shirts, pens, coffee cups with every donation. So please help us share these videos. Tell your friends and family. Again, without your help, we have no chance. But with your help, we can make London a world-class city once again. So I'm Brian Rose. I'm signing off here from London Real World headquarters, and I look forward to changing the game and creating a better future for you and for our families. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time.
At London Real, we believe that individual transformation can change the world. Join us and start your journey today.